All right. Nope. Nope. Okay. Up next, we've got Deborah Simpier from representing Hawk Network and Althea, who will be discussing some very interesting things regarding empowering new ways to build, operate real-world asset infrastructure and utilities.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm honored to be on the stage with so many great speakers, and thank you all for those that are still here at the end of this long, hot day. My name is Deborah Simpier. I am the CEO of Hawk Networks and the co-founder of Althea, and I'm excited to share what we've been building in infrastructure, connectivity, and system design over the last, it's been 5 years. So Althea is the payment layer powering infrastructure and connectivity. It is machine-to-machine microtransactions and payments. It is system design and infrastructure and connectivity. And if we think about how legacy payments are settled today, they're very manual, they're very human. There's the emails and purchase orders and net 30 invoices, and maybe that's worked in the past, but they're incredibly inefficient, and it certainly won't work in the future economy of autonomous vehicles, robotic devices, connected smart cities. You can't, you can't net 30 a smart tractor or your smart trash can, right? The idea that seems a bit even ridiculous. And so Althea is the connectivity layer that sort of addresses that problem. And I want to kind of take you all back to when we started late 2017, 2018, because Althea's approach is very unique in this ecosystem. Many blockchain projects start off with sort of a build it and they will come, or they'll look at incentivizing and bootstrapping mechanisms for infrastructure, and then moving on, kind of hoping customers will arrive. But if you think about where Althea was in 2017, we were very focused on this problem in particular, where we, in the US, 1 out of every 4 people, right? There's infrastructure, they spent $100 billion over the last 10, 15 years in infrastructure granting alone to build fiber, 5G networks, so forth. But yet, 1 in every 4 people don't have access to the internet at their home. So why was this? I mean, it's not because the ISPs are evil. Of course, they'd love to have this market share. This is 25% of the market they're leaving behind. And so we started to look at how the systems were designed. And you see a lot of this kind of thing. So this is a map of US broadband infrastructure, and they've done this throughout the US. And you can see there's lots of these little green dots, which are connected homes, right next to dots that are red, that don't have connectivity. And pretty much anywhere in the US, you're going to find a very similar map, and probably most places in the world. I think there are some more modernized cities, but for the most part, this is a pretty similar look at the last mile. And it's because there's these sort of silos, right? There's a rental system, and if you need to have a competitor, they got to do a whole other fiber optic cable, and it's just sort of intractable. And then the OpEx doesn't work. They're very debt heavy. The cost to acquire customers is quite high. But we looked at the core of the internet, and when you look at kind of the internet exchange, when you go deeper, when you sort of decouple infrastructure and service, and you're in the internet exchange, the way that sort of carriers charge each other kind of almost programmatically, then you created a bandwidth marketplace where bandwidth is a commodity and service is decoupled. And what's happened there is year-over-year costs have gone down, and year-over-year capacity for bandwidth has gone up. So we realized that it wasn't an infrastructure problem. It was a systemic problem. And so Althea was sort of core founded on the principle that we could remove the manual friction by changing how we think about payments, interestingly enough. So Althea's networks are very different than the traditional kind of legacy. What we think of as an ISP, we get to re-envision what we think of as an infrastructure provider. The infrastructure itself is open access and decoupled from the service layer. So new kinds of entities can own infrastructure, many different kinds of entities can own infrastructure, and that service layer can be local and separate, be a different type of entity. This is very similar to what we think about with real estate too, which has also allowed many different people to invest in real estate because the landlord is a different entity than the property manager. This is kind of based on two kind of core fundamentals with Althea. So the first is machine-to-machine payments. So meaning that your device or running that node in the network, whether that's a telecom tower or your router in your home, it doesn't matter which. It's still going to have an account, and it's going to programmatically meter and make payments automatically. And that can be extended to any kind of device. And then the other core principle is what we call a price-aware routing protocol. So how do devices talk to one another? And this is pretty exciting. This is where we really get into market dynamics and can do really exciting things, because every Althea router has on one side cost and the other side latency or quality. So on a dynamic, minute-by-minute basis, you can make the market for that, for your choice of cost or latency. And so what that does is create a holistic design. It's hardware agnostic. We can do fiber optic, 4G, 5G, fixed wireless, and it all works in a seamless sort of environment. And it also allows for us to do really neat things like this because it is hardware agnostic. You can really re-envision what you think about for ISP. What is an ISP? For example, some of the biggest users of connectivity are enterprise. We worked with an EV company that shared with us that they are looking at several billions of dollars of connectivity costs over the next 10 years. Simply for over-the-air updates for their vehicles, basic connectivity at charging stations. When you're talking about that kind of capital, then you can see where it becomes really dynamic or really compelling that they can then own their own infrastructure, utilize the Althea platform, and receive revenue while someone else is doing the service side of it. Traditionally, before kind of an Althea platform came along, you'd have to do both. You'd have to be the person answering the 3 a.m. call and doing services as well as providing infrastructure access. So what we have discovered that is over the last 4 or 5 years is we've built together with these enterprise clients, with people in rural areas, in urban environments where payments needed to be much more flexible. It turns out utility payments, the main problem with actually paying those is of course, cost is a component to it, but it's flexibility, being able to prepay. In fact, 72 million people in the US have prepaid phones simply for that flexibility. And that's that market, that 25% that we're solving for internationally and rurally. But there's a bit of a problem with scaling that. So, right, we've doubled the number of states that we're in, we're growing. We have more networks to be built than can be built because access to capital in telecom networks is difficult. It's another one of those friction pieces. So we encountered the same sort of difficulty in the frictions of the interconnections that existed in the machine-to-machine payments also existed in access to capital. Right now, if you wanted to invest in real estate or invest in telecom or infrastructure, you'd have to go buy some shares in a company, right? It all comes together. It's very hard. You have to vet the company. There's some risk involved with that. And for most, accredited investors, even it's quite untenable. You're not really going to be able to do that. And for most different types of entities, mid-sized entities, this also takes a long time to do as well. So this is where we looked at that kind of next evolution of Althea, which takes and tokenizes the revenue associated with those Althea accounts. So that telecom tower, that piece of infrastructure, that revenue that is being earned programmatically, we're actually taking and tokenizing that as well. And so by doing that, we are removing a lot of the risk because we have the transparency of that tokenized asset. And that asset then can participate in lending, borrowing, buying, and selling. And that capital, the kind of crowdfunding can also happen as well, too. So many different people could come together to build a network as well. So it adds that flexibility in order so that builders and that capital can meet. And you can also do really fun things like this. So once that asset is tokenized on chain, then pretty much any of the kind of DeFi tools that we think about can be utilized for these infrastructure assets. You could pool them together in a pool like this. You could do collateralized lending. That's getting paid back programmatically with that revenue occurring. You can maybe even use telecom assets to collateralize a stablecoin. And all of the transparency, programmability, and open access, that permissionless access that we think about for DeFi can meet infrastructure, telecom, connectivity assets. And this is really what we call infrastructure financing, or IFI. And that, again, that's sort of the permissionless, trustless, and transparency that we have in DeFi, meeting the ability to build, fund, operate on the infrastructure and telecom side. And we've been talking about this in broadband. That's where we found our market originally. That's where we proved out the thesis. But globally, infrastructure, utilities is a large market. And this can be anything, if we're talking about metering and billing machines, you're talking energy, water infrastructure. Of course, telecom is a big sector of that as well. And so we think this is a very sort of exciting development. And it feels like it's the right time. This is really where we're starting to think about the breakdowns in multiple different systems. The same sort of friction of interconnection that's happening in telecom is existing in power grids as well. And the same tooling where many different people can own infrastructure and the revenue can pass through or the infrastructure can be financed is basically the same. There's not a lot of differences there. So not only do we think the solutions are now here, we think the time is actually right for it. Another thing that's very interesting is we think that this will be driven a lot by autonomous and robotics. I spent a lot of time in the Midwest recently. We've got a 5G farm there. But something that's interesting about that demographic is the age of farmers is around 70 years old. And I think this is pretty global. I don't think this is just US. But, and the young people are leaving. So there are no humans to work farms in about a decade. So having autonomous vehicles that then can make payments in real time is not just a luxury, it's going to be a necessity. And we think this will push machine-to-machine transactions and infrastructure finance forward. So in the future, we envision that payments can be made in space and time. So think about the farmer who has that autonomous vehicle. One of the things that's really exciting about what radio can do beyond providing connectivity, so that farmer might have his own Althea network, he's earning some revenue for it, it's offsetting his costs. But he can also triangulate that position. So he can know when that truck full of corn is moving through a certain space and time, and that could automatically create a payment as that truck sort of moved through and filled up. And what's neat about that is once that payment is on chain, then you can think about different ways of revenue sharing. Perhaps there was a lot of investors that came together to grow that corn. And then as that truck moves through, fills up with corn, that payment happens simultaneously, then they're paid off automatically. And what's neat about this is that it starts to change the UX from how humans manually interact with things and all of the problems with humans manually interacting, all the friction, all the time, all the labor, all the mistakes, all the risk, to the UX from machine to machine. And that's where we can get into the programmability, where things can be distributed, and most importantly, where many different new types of entities can participate in this economy. So where we used to think of infrastructure as primarily in the role of government or large monopolistic entities, because it was hard to coordinate. It was hard to acquire the kind of capital it would take to build these networks. Now we can envision where many different new entities can participate in these markets, have leverage, and have choice. And that's what we're excited about in the future for Althea, and we welcome folks to participate with us. Please, we have a hackathon going on right now. We have Discord and Twitter. Please follow us there, and thanks again.